The archaeology of the IMPOSSI Biluwak. Outside, look at the grandest buildings in your city. The ones with the heavy stone pillars, the intricate red brickwork, and the domes that seem to touch the heavens. Now look down. Look at the windows that are half buried in the soil. Windows that sit at eye level with the pavement, peering into the darkness of a basement that was clearly designed to be a grand first floor. Historians will tell you this was a design choice. They will tell you it was for ventilation, or perhaps a curious architectural trend of the 19th century. But your eyes see something else. They see a world that was drowned, not by water, but by earth. They see the aftermath of an event so massive, so global, that it buried the foundations of our civilization under millions of tons of mud and silt. This is the mystery of the mud flood, an anomaly that spans from the streets of London to the squares of Moscow, from the heart of Washington, D.C. to the colonial outposts of Southeast Asia. We are told we built these cities in the 1800s using horse and carriage. Yet the evidence suggests we didn't build them, we inherited them, we dug them out. Welcome to a journey into macro history. Today, we peel back the layers of the official narrative to reveal the skeleton of a lost world. We are going to examine the physical contradictions that defy every textbook in your library. We are going to ask why the early photographs of our greatest cities show empty streets and a silent world. And most importantly, we will ask who had the power to restart the clock of humanity and hide the ruins of an empire that once spanned the entire globe. The anatomy of a hidden Catastrophic chalet must begin with the soil. Throughout the mid-1800s, something shifted. If you look at the construction photos or the renovations of major capital cities during this era, you notice a recurring theme: the excavation of immense amounts of dirt. This isn't just foundation work. We see grand arched doorways that lead to nowhere, buried deep beneath the current street level. We see sophisticated drainage systems that predate the inventors who supposedly designed them. Consider the old world architecture. Whether you are in San Francisco, St. Petersburg, or Tokyo, the style is eerily identical. Red brick, arched windows, star-shaped fortifications, and copper domes. This is a global aesthetic that suggests a unified civilizational world where borders were not what they are today. The official history says these were built during the Industrial Revolution by people who were still struggling with basic sanitation. Yet, these buildings possess a mathematical precision and a structural integrity that we struggle to replicate today, even with laser levels and heavy machinery. Why would a pioneer in the 1850s struggling to find clean water spend the time and resources to build a 10-story cathedral with a 3-story basement buried in the mud? The answer is simple, yet terrifying. They didn't. They arrived after the mud had settled. They found a world already built, a world that had been abandoned or wiped out by a cataclysm that we are no longer allowed to remember. Look at the star forts. Thousands of these geometrically perfect fortifications are scattered across every continent. They are told to be defensive structures for cannon warfare, but their geometry suggests something far more advanced: a frequency-based energy grid. Many of these forts are also partially submerged or buried under layers of sediment that the official timeline cannot explain. If the mud flood was a localized event, we could dismiss it, but it is ubiquitous. From the sunken streets of Seattle to the massive, earth-moving projects of 19th century Europe, the evidence screams of a global reset. A moment in time where the earth liquefied, where the sky fell, and where the survivors were left to pick through the wreckage of a Titan's playground. The silent cities, and the ghosts of the 1850 SIF. The physical evidence of buried foundations raises the question. The early records of our ancestors provide a chilling silence. We must turn our attention to the era of the daguerreotype, the birth of photography. Between 1840 and 1860, the first cameras began to capture the great capitals of the world. But when we look at these images, we are met with a haunting paradox. In photographs of Paris, London, New York, and Moscow from this period, we see majestic boulevards, grand cathedrals, and sprawling plazas. These are cities built to house millions, yet the streets are empty. There are no horses, no carriages, no bustling markets, and no crowds. The world appears as a ghost town, frozen in time. Historians offer a technical excuse. The exposure times were too long. They claim that because the shutter stayed open for minutes, anyone walking would be blurred into invisibility. But this explanation fails under scrutiny. If the streets were truly bustling, we would see ghostly blurs, dark streaks, or stationary objects like carts and horses. Instead, we see pristine, dust-free streets. We see cities that look like they were just scrubbed clean ore cities that were recently vacated. Where was the population? If these cities were supposedly reaching the height of the Industrial Revolution, where are the people who built them? This leads us to one of the most mysterious phenomena of the 19th century, the orphan trains. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 250,000 orphaned or abandoned children were transported from the crowded coastal cities of the United States to the rural Midwest. We are told this was a charitable effort to find them homes, but under the lens of macro history, it looks like something else entirely, a repopulation effort. We see a sudden surge in massive orphanages, foundling hospitals, and insane asylums during this period. It is as if a new generation was being processed into a world they did not build. These children were raised with no memory of the old world. They were the blank slates upon which the new narrative was written. And then there are the World's Fairs. From the Crystal Palace in 1851 to the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, the elite of the New World organized massive exhibitions. They showcased temporary cities of unimaginable grandeur, built with marble-like facades and filled with advanced technology. And then, as soon as the fairs ended, they burned them down or demolished them, because the World's Fairs were not celebrations of progress. They were the liquidation sales of the Tartarian Empire. They were a way for the new controllers to show the masses the technology and architecture of the previous civilization before it was systematically erased from existence. They called it temporary so the public would ask why they could build like that anymore. The Great Reset and the architects of Amini Sayu understand how a global empire like Tartaria could be erased. We must look at the official disasters of the 1800s. The timeline is littered with great fires. The Great Fire of Chicago, the Great Fire of London, the burning of Moscow, the Great Fire of Toronto, city after city built of unburnable stone and brick, supposedly leveled by a single-tipped lantern or a stray spark. In reality, these fires were likely controlled demolitions or the final cleanup of the mud flood's aftermath. Anything that didn't fit the new industrial narrative, the free energy antennas, the atmospheric electricity collectors, the majestic domes, had to be destroyed. The year 1816 is recorded in history as the year without a summer. A mysterious volcanic winter gripped the planet. Crops failed, the sky turned red, and temperatures plummeted. This is often blamed on Mount Tambora, but macro history suggests a more violent cause. Could this have been the moment of the cataclysm? A plasma discharge, a pole shift, or a saturation of the atmosphere that caused the soil itself to liquefy and rise, swallowing the first floors of the world. Following this chaos, the architects of amnesia stepped in. The victors of the Napoleonic Wars reorganized the map. They established new borders, new currencies, and most importantly, a new educational system. They created the Prussian model of education, designed to produce obedient workers and soldiers who would never question the timeline they were given. They took the grand cathedrals, structures clearly designed as acoustic power plants and healing centers, and rebranded them as houses of worship. They took the star forts and called them military outposts. They took the free energy grids and replaced them with wired, metered electricity, ensuring that humanity would forever be dependent on a centralized power structure. We are living in the ruins of a golden age, walking on the rooftops of a civilization that mastered the very elements, and the only reason we don't know it is because we were taught to look at a buried window and see a basement. The Tartarian energy grid, Antikek, and the harvesting of the ETHR. To understand the scale of what was lost in the mud flood, we must look up. Above the buried windows, atop the domes and spires of the old world, sits the smoking gun of a suppressed technology, the antennas of the past. If you examine photographs of pre-1900 cities, you will see an incredible density of ornate metalwork atop every significant building. These were not mere crosses or flagpoles. These were atmospheric electricity collectors. The old world did not run on coal, oil, or gas. It ran on the ether, the inexhaustible energy field that surrounds our planet. The cathedrals, a word derived from cathode, were not originally designed for religious sermons. They were massive stone resonators, the high vaulted ceilings, the rose windows made of specific crystalline glass, and the organ pipes were components of a vibrational technology. They used sound and frequency to heal the body, harmonize the weather, and provide wireless power to the surrounding area. When the mud came, or when the Great Reset was initiated, this grid was sabotaged. The copper domes were stripped, the antennas were removed, and the narrative was shifted. We were told that electricity was a new invention by Edison and Tesla, when in reality, Tesla was merely trying to rediscover the fractured pieces of the Tartarian grid. The metered, wired world we live in today is a primitive, profitable downgrade from the free, wireless world that was buried under the silt of the 19th century. The macro-geopolitics of ERSUR: how do you hide a global empire? You break it into pieces and rename them. Before the mid-19th century, maps from the finest cartographers, Mercator or Ortelius Hondiasol, showed a massive territory labeled Grand Tartary or Tartaria. It occupied the vast majority of northern Asia, stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean. It was a confederation of highly advanced Tartar-Mongol peoples who held the keys to the Silk Road and the hidden technologies of the north. The official history tells us Tartaria was just a vague geographic term for a collection of nomadic tribes. But nomads do not build star forts. Nomads do not build the Trans-Siberian architecture that defies modern engineering. The fall of Tartaria was the result of a pincer movement. From the west, the Romanovs, the fake Russian czars, pushed eastward. From the south, the Qing dynasty pushed northward. And from the seas, the British East India Company dismantled the trade networks. The mud flood provided the perfect cover for this geopolitical assassination. While the empire was reeling from a natural cataclysm, the new global powers moved in to scavenge the ruins. They burned the libraries. They relabeled the grand buildings as post offices, asylums, and parliament buildings. They invented the concept of colonial architecture to explain why a British building in India looked exactly like a Russian building in St. Petersburg. It wasn't colonial, it was the universal style of the unified civilization that preceded us. The biological reset, the orphan trains, and the loss of a Hanseastiar Waitha. Most tragic part of this macro-historical shift was the human element. If you have a massive cataclysm followed by a war for the ruins, you end up with a surplus of children who have no parents to tell them the truth. In the mid to late 1800s, baby farms and massive orphanages appeared overnight. The orphan trains in America were mirrored by similar movements in Europe and Russia. These children were shipped to the frontier, to the freshly dug out cities. They were given new names, new histories, and a new purpose to be the labor force for the new controllers. By the time these children grew up, the old world was just a collection of scary ruins or grand monuments. They were told their primitive ancestors built with hammers and chisels. The biological link to the Tartarian knowledge was severed. The memory was bleached. The awakening, looking through the VIL history, is not a linear progression from primitive to advanced. It is a cycle of rises and falls, of golden ages and dark resets. The mud flood evidence is not just a theory, it is a physical invitation to stop being a tourist in your own city and start being an investigator. When you see a red brick building with its first floor underground, you are looking at a survivor. When you see a star fort on a map, you are looking at a node of an ancient energy grid. When you see a great fire in a history book, you are looking at a crime scene. The controllers of our current reality want you to believe you are the pinnacle of human achievement. They want you to believe that before 1900, people lived in filth and ignorance, because if you realized that your great-great-grandparents had free energy, global peace, and architecture that healed the soul, you might start asking for it back. The mud is drying. The truth is rising. The next time you walk past a basement window, remember, you aren't looking down into a cellar. You are looking back into a forgotten empire. The Star Fort Enigma, the geometric power stations of the old WORLD-2, understand why the mud flood was so devastating. We must understand the star forts, the most misunderstood structures in human history. Officially, these are called bastion forts, designed to withstand cannon fire. But look at them from above. Their geometry is not merely defensive, it is fractal. They resemble snowflakes, circuits, or cymatic patterns, the shapes formed when matter is subjected to specific sound frequencies. These forts are always located at strategic nodes of the Earth's magnetic grid. They are almost always connected to complex underground water systems. In the Tartarian world, water was not just for drinking, it was a conductor. The star forts acted as massive resonators, grounding the atmospheric energy collected by the spires of the cities and distributing it through the subterranean aquifers. When the cataclysm struck, whether it was a pole shift, a solar flare, or a deliberate weaponization of the frequency grid, these star forts were the epicenters. The liquefaction of soil occurs when high-frequency vibrations turn solid Earth into a sublake state. This is how the mud flood happened. The very technology that provided free energy to the world was turned against it, causing the ground to rise and swallow the foundations of the global empire. The economic reset from the ether to the Met-Chotha, the final layer of the macro-historical erasure, was financial. The Tartarian civilization operated on a free energy model. When energy is free and abundant, the current debt-based monetary system cannot exist. You cannot enslave a population with utility bills or fuel costs if the atmosphere itself provides the power. The 19th century Great Reset was, at its core, a hostile takeover of the world's energy supply. The new controllers, the banking cartels that emerged after the Napoleonic Wars, needed to monetize existence. To do this, they had to destroy the antique tech. They introduced the meter. They switched the world from the longitudinal waves of the ether to the transverse waves of alternating current, which is easier to measure, taxes, and cut off. This is why figures like Nikola Tesla were first funded and then destroyed. He was trying to bring back the Tartarian ghost, and the architects of the reset could not allow the genie back out of the bottle. The Great Depression and the various financial collapses of the late 1800s were the final sanding down of the old world's wealth. By the time the 20th century began, the transition was complete. Humanity was locked in a concrete cage, paying for the very energy that their ancestors harvested for free from the sky. The magnitude of the TRUTSW have covered the buried windows, the empty streets, the erased maps, and the hijacked technology. But the true scale of the mud flood is not found. In a book, it is found in the feeling you get when you stand in front of an old world building, a feeling of unbelonging, a subconscious recognition that we are currently squatting in a civilization that was far more elegant, more spiritual, and more advanced than our own. The official narrative is a fragile shell. It requires you to ignore your own eyes. It requires you to believe that primitive men built the impossible while we, with all our computers, struggled to maintain the very structures they left behind. The mud is not just in the ground, it is in our minds. But as we begin to dig, as we begin to share these hidden truths, the silt is washed away. We are the generation that will look at the buried windows and finally see the light coming from the floor below.